The rental car's engine purred to a stop in front of the weathered wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Maplewood. Population 3,847." And Owen Garrett wondered for the 100th time why his acquisition team couldn't handle this themselves. He adjusted his Tom Ford suit jacket and stared through the windshield at the main street of what looked like a postcard from 1952. Red brick buildings lined both sides of the road, their awnings casting shadows over shop windows displaying handmade quilts and antique furniture. A golden retriever sprawled across the sidewalk in front of what appeared to be the only cafe in town. Owen stepped out into the humid September afternoon, the air thick with the scent of fresh cut grass and something sweet he couldn't quite place. His leather shoes clicked against the pavement as he surveyed his surroundings. This was a far cry from the Manhattan skyline he'd left behind 6 hours ago. As CEO of Garrett Industries, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies on the East Coast, he typically spent his days in boardrooms with floor-to-ceiling windows, not on streets where people apparently let their dogs sleep in public walkways. He grabbed his briefcase and phone, checking his messages. His assistant had sent him the details again. The town's old textile mill sat on prime real estate, and the owners were finally willing to sell after decades of resistance. Owen's company wanted to convert it into a state-of-the-art research facility. The numbers made sense. The location was perfect for their expansion plans. The only complication was the town council's requirement that he present his proposal at their monthly meeting in 3 days. They wanted the CEO himself, not some representative. Small-town politics, he'd been told. They wanted to look him in the eye 3 days in Maplewood. He'd booked a room at something called the Sweetbriar Inn and planned to spend the time reviewing documents and preparing his presentation. Simple enough. The inn turned out to be a Victorian house painted pale yellow with white trim, complete with a wraparound porch and actual rocking chairs. An elderly woman with silver hair and a warm smile checked him in, insisting on carrying his bags herself despite his protests. She introduced herself as Martha and told him breakfast was served from 7 to 9, and if he needed anything at all, he should just holler. Owen's room was surprisingly comfortable, decorated in shades of cream and sage green, with a 4-poster bed and a window overlooking what Martha called the town square, though it was really just a grassy area with a gazebo and a few benches. He unpacked his laptop and settled into work, but his internet connection kept dropping. After the 5th disconnection, he called down to the front desk. "Oh, honey, the internet can be temperamental up there," Martha said cheerfully. "But you know the library has the best connection in town. Bethany keeps everything running smooth as silk over there. It's just 2 blocks down on Maple Street. Can't miss it, the library." Owen hadn't set foot in a physical library in years. Everything he needed was digital, accessible from anywhere. But he needed a stable connection, and he wasn't about to spend 3 days fighting with spotty Wi-Fi. He grabbed his laptop and headed out. The Maplewood Public Library was housed in a stone building that looked like it predated everything else on the street. Wide steps led up to heavy wooden doors, and through the windows, Owen could see warm light spilling across what appeared to be endless rows of books. He pushed through the entrance and stopped. The interior was stunning. High ceilings with exposed wooden beams, tall windows letting in natural light, and yes, books everywhere, but also comfortable reading nooks with plush chairs, a children's area with colorful murals on the walls, and several tables with people working quietly on laptops. The smell of old paper and furniture polish filled his nose, and something about it made his chest feel strange. "Can I help you?" Owen turned toward the voice and felt the breath catch in his throat. The woman standing behind the circulation desk was breathtaking in a way that had nothing to do with the careful polish of the women he usually met. She had dark hair pulled back in a loose braid, warm brown eyes behind black framed glasses, and a dusting of freckles across her nose. She wore a simple green cardigan over a white dress, and when she smiled at him, it was genuine and reached all the way to her eyes. Yes, he managed, mentally kicking himself for the hesitation. He was a CEO who negotiated million-dollar deals. He could talk to a pretty librarian. I'm told you have the best internet in town. Her smile widened. Martha sent you, didn't she? You must be staying at the inn. She gestured toward the tables. You're welcome to work here as long as you'd like. The connection is reliable and we're open until 8 tonight. Thank you. He moved toward a table, then paused. I'm Owen, by the way. Bethany, she said, and there was something musical about the way she said it. Bethany Torres. I'm the head librarian here. Let me know if you need anything. Owen sat up at a table by one of the large windows and tried to focus on his work, but he found his attention drifting to Bethany. She moved through the library with easy grace, helping an elderly man find a large print mystery novel, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a group of children for story time, her voice animated as she read about a dragon who was afraid of flying. She laughed with patrons, remembered their names, asked about their families. She was clearly the heart of this place. He forced himself to concentrate on the acquisition documents. The mill property was perfect for their needs. The building itself would need to be demolished, but the land was ideal. They could break ground within 6 months if everything went smoothly. The research facility would be cutting edge, bringing dozens of high-paying jobs to the area. It was a good deal for everyone. Finding everything okay. Owen looked up to find Bethany standing beside his table, holding a steaming mug. She set it down in front of him. You look like you could use some coffee. It's fresh. I just made a pot in the back. Thank you, he said, surprised by the gesture. You didn't have to do that. Small-town hospitality, she said with a shrug. Plus, you've been frowning at that laptop for 2 hours straight. Figured you needed it. He glanced at his watch, startled to realize she was right. I didn't realize I'd been here that long. Time flies when you're absorbed in something. She tilted her head, studying him with open curiosity. What brings you to Maplewood? We don't get many visitors in business suits. Owen hesitated. He wasn't trying to hide his purpose, but he also didn't want to start any rumors before the town council meeting. Business, he said finally. Just here for a few days. Mysterious, Bethany said, but her tone was teasing rather than suspicious. Well, enjoy your stay. Maplewood is a special place once you give it a chance. She walked away before he could respond, and Owen found himself watching her go, wondering what made this town so special to her. He worked until the library closed at 8, barely noticing the time passing. Bethany announced closing time with a gentle reminder to patrons, and Owen packed up his things reluctantly. The work environment had been perfect. Quiet but not silent, with the occasional sound of pages turning and muffled conversations. Peaceful in a way his corporate office never was. Same time tomorrow, Bethany asked as he passed the circulation desk. Probably, Owen admitted. If that's all right, more than all right, that's what we're here for. She pulled on a denim jacket over her dress. Have a good night, Owen. He watched her lock up the library and head down the street, disappearing around a corner. Then he walked back to the inn, his mind full of quarterly reports and expansion plans, and the way Bethany's eyes crinkled when she smiled. The next morning, after Martha's breakfast of homemade biscuits and gravy that put every restaurant he'd ever been to shame, Owen returned to the library. Bethany was already there, shelving books from a cart, humming something under her breath. She looked up when he entered and gave him a small wave. "Morning. Coffee's already on if you want some." Owen found himself settling into a routine. He worked at the same table, taking breaks to refill his coffee from the pot Bethany kept going in the small staff kitchen. Around 11, she brought him a sandwich from the cafe down the street. "You looked hungry," she explained when he tried to pay her. "Just pay it forward sometime." "I insist," he said, pulling out his wallet. She waved him off. "Save it. Buy someone else lunch when they need it." It was such a foreign concept to him. In his world, everything had a price, a transaction, a bottom line. But Bethany just smiled and went back to work, and Owen found himself thinking about kindness and what it meant to live in a place where people did things for each other without expecting immediate repayment. That afternoon, a woman came in with 2 young children who immediately ran to the picture book section. Bethany greeted them by name, asking about the kids' school day and whether they'd enjoyed the books they'd borrowed last week. The mother looked tired, and Owen overheard her mention something about working double shifts. "Hey," Bethany said gently, pulling the woman aside. "We're doing a family movie night here on Friday. Free pizza, free entertainment, and the kids can play with the other children. You should come." "You look like you could use a break." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Bethany. Really." Owen watched the exchange and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just a library. It was a community center, a safe haven, a place where people came not just for books but for connection. He worked until closing again, and as Bethany locked up, she turned to him. "Want to walk? I live just a few blocks away and the evening's nice." Owen surprised himself by agreeing. They walked slowly down the quiet streets, past houses with wide porches and flower gardens, past the cafe and a barber shop with a red and white striped pole. "How long have you been the librarian here?" Owen asked. "5 years officially, but I grew up coming to this library. Mrs. Henderson was the librarian when I was a kid. She's the one who taught me to love books, really love them. When she retired, I jumped at the chance to take over." Bethany's face glowed with enthusiasm. "It's my dream job, honestly. I get to share stories with people, help them find information, create programs for the community. There's nothing else I'd rather do." "You're good at it," Owen said. "I've never seen anyone so connected to their patrons. They're not just patrons, they're my neighbors, my friends. This town raised me." She paused in front of a small cottage with a blue door and a garden bursting with late-season flowers. "This is me." Owen found himself not wanting the conversation to end. "Bethany, would you have dinner with me tomorrow night?" "There must be a restaurant around here somewhere," she laughed, a bright sound in the twilight. "There's Rosie's Diner, which has the best pie in 3 counties, and there's the Mill House Inn, which is fancier but still casual by city standards." She studied him for a moment. "Why do I get the feeling you're used to much fancier places?" "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'd like to try the pie." "Rosie's it is. 7 tomorrow, perfect." Owen walked back to the inn with a lightness in his step that had nothing to do with business deals and everything to do with the woman with the warm smile and kind heart. The next day passed in a blur of spreadsheets and projections, but Owen's mind kept wandering to the evening ahead. He'd packed one outfit that wasn't a business suit, dark jeans and a navy sweater, and he changed into them feeling oddly nervous. This wasn't a business dinner. This was personal, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd been on an actual date rather than a strategic social engagement. Rosie's Diner was exactly what he expected. Red vinyl booths, a black and white checkered floor, and a jukebox in the corner playing oldies. Bethany was already there, sitting in a booth by the window, and she'd left her glasses at home. She wore a soft blue dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes, and her hair was down, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. "You look beautiful," Owen said, sliding into the booth across from her. She blushed. "Thank you. You look different without the suit, more relaxed." A waitress came by, a woman probably in her 60s with a name tag that read Rosie. She gave Owen a thorough once-over before turning to Bethany. "This the mysterious stranger who's been camping out at the library. Rosie, this is Owen. Owen, Rosie, who has no filter whatsoever." "Don't need one at my age," Rosie said cheerfully. "What can I get you two?" They ordered burgers and fries, and when Rosie walked away, Bethany leaned forward. "Fair warning. By tomorrow morning, the entire town will know we had dinner together. Does that bother you?" "Not particularly." "Does it bother you?" Owen thought about it. In New York, his private life was constantly under scrutiny. Business journals tracked who he dated, where he ate, what deals he was making. But that attention felt invasive, calculated. This felt different, warmer somehow. "No," he said, "it doesn't." They talked easily over dinner. Bethany told him about growing up in Maplewood, about summer nights catching fireflies and winter days sledding down the big hill behind the old mill. She talked about studying library science in college, about the culture shock of living in a bigger city for those 4 years, and how relieved she'd been to come home. "Some people can't wait to leave small towns," she said, stealing a fry from his plate. "But for me, this is everything." "I know it probably seems boring to someone like you." "Someone like me? Come on, Owen. You're clearly not from around here. Those shoes alone probably cost more than my monthly salary. You're sophisticated, successful, probably from some big city where exciting things happen all the time." Owen set down his burger. "New York," he admitted. "And yes, I'm successful, but I'm not sure I'd call my life exciting. It's busy, stressful, full of meetings and obligations and people who want things from me." "What do you do?" Here was the moment of truth. "I'm a CEO. I run a pharmaceutical company." Bethany's eyes widened slightly. "That's impressive. And you're in Maplewood for business." "Yes." Owen hesitated, not wanting to lie but not ready to reveal the whole truth yet. "There's a property here I'm interested in." "The old mill," Bethany said, understanding dawning on her face. "You're the one who wants to buy it. You know about that." "Owen, this is a town of less than 4,000 people. Everyone knows about that. The mill's been sitting empty for almost 20 years. If someone's interested in developing it, that's big news." She leaned back in the booth, studying him. "What are you planning to do with it?" "Build a research facility. It would bring jobs to the area, investment. We'd be creating something valuable." "You'd be tearing down a piece of history," Bethany said quietly. "That mill is important to this town. It's where most of our grandparents worked, where this community was built. It's an empty building that's falling apart. It's a landmark. It's part of who we are." The conversation had shifted, become tense, and Owen felt the ease between them evaporating. "I'm presenting to the town council tomorrow night. I'd hoped you might understand. I understand that you see dollar signs where we see memories." Bethany's voice wasn't angry, just sad. "I should go." "Bethany, wait." Owen reached across the table, but she was already sliding out of the booth. "Thank you for dinner, Owen. Good luck with your presentation." She left money on the table for her half of the meal and walked out, the bell over the door chiming behind her. Owen sat there feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Rosie came by with 2 slices of pie and set them down with a knowing look. "That went well," she said dryly. Owen paid the check and walked back to the inn through streets that suddenly felt colder, despite the warm evening. He'd known the mill purchase might be controversial, but he hadn't expected it to matter so much to him what one person thought. Except Bethany wasn't just one person. She was someone who'd gotten under his skin in a matter of days, someone who made him question things he'd always taken for granted. The next morning, Owen didn't go to the library. He spent the day in his room at the inn, reviewing his presentation and trying not to think about Bethany's disappointed face. Martha brought him lunch on a tray and gave him a look that said she'd heard all about the dinner. "You know," she said, setting down the tray, "that mill has been standing since 1897. My grandfather worked there for 40 years, lost 3 fingers to one of the machines but kept working because that's what you did back then. It closed in 2006 when the company moved production overseas. Broke a lot of hearts. I understand it has sentimental value," Owen said, "but sentiment doesn't pay bills or create jobs." "No," Martha agreed, "but it does create community, something to think about." The town council meeting was held at the community center at 7. Owen arrived early, dressed in his best suit, presentation loaded on his laptop. The room filled quickly, far more people than he'd expected for a routine council meeting. He saw familiar faces from the library, from the diner, and in the back row, arms crossed, sat Bethany. The mayor, a friendly man in his 50s named Harold Green, called the meeting to order and introduced Owen. He stood and launched into his presentation, explaining the benefits of the research facility, the jobs it would create, the economic impact. He showed architectural renderings of a sleek modern building, talked about cutting-edge research and innovation. The council members listened politely, asked questions about timelines and environmental impact. But Owen could feel the coldness in the room, the resistance. These people didn't want his research facility. They wanted their mill back, even if that was impossible. When he finished, Mayor Green opened the floor for public comment. Person after person stood to speak. They talked about family history, about the mill as a symbol of the town's resilience, about the importance of preserving their heritage. Some were angry, some were sad, but all of them were passionate. Then Bethany stood, and Owen's heart sank. "I'm Bethany Torres, head librarian. I've lived in Maplewood my whole life except for college. I love this town. I love its history, its people, its sense of community." She looked directly at Owen. "The mill represents something important to us. It's part of our identity, but I also understand that we can't live in the past. The mill has been empty for nearly 20 years. It's not coming back as a textile manufacturer." Owen felt a flicker of hope. "However," Bethany continued, "I don't think the solution is to tear it down and replace it with something that doesn't fit who we are. Mr. Garrett's research facility looks impressive, but it could be anywhere. It has nothing to do with Maplewood specifically. If we're going to move forward, we need to do it in a way that honors our past while building our future." She sat down, and the room erupted in applause. Owen felt like he'd been simultaneously defended and rejected, and he wasn't sure which feeling was stronger. The council voted to table the decision for a month, asking Owen to revise his proposal to address the community's concerns. Mayor Green pulled him aside afterward. "Look, Mr. Garrett, we appreciate your interest in our town, but Bethany's right. We need something that fits us, not just a generic facility that could go anywhere. If you can figure out how to make this work for Maplewood specifically, we'll listen. Otherwise," he shrugged. Owen left the meeting feeling defeated. He'd never had a proposal rejected before, never been asked to revise his plans to accommodate sentiment and nostalgia. It went against everything he knew about business. But as he walked through the quiet streets back to the inn, he found himself thinking about what Bethany had said. About honoring the past while building the future. About creating something that belonged specifically to this place and these people. He found Bethany sitting on the steps of the library, still in the dress she'd worn to the meeting. She looked up as he approached but didn't stand. "That was quite a speech," Owen said. "I meant every word. I know you did." He sat down beside her on the steps. "I'm not used to this." To what? To caring what people think beyond the bottom line. To having to consider history and emotion in my decisions. In my world, if the numbers work, you move forward. Simple. That must be lonely, Bethany said quietly. Owen thought about his penthouse apartment that he barely spent time in, about business dinners where every conversation was strategic, about a life filled with people but empty of real connection. Yes, he admitted. It is. They sat in silence for a moment, the night air warm around them. I don't want to be someone who tears things down, Owen said, but I don't know how to build what this town needs. I don't understand it well enough. Bethany turned to look at him, her expression softening. Then learn, you have a month, use it. Will you help me? She studied him for a long moment, and Owen held his breath, realizing how much her answer mattered. Okay, she said finally, but you have to really commit to understanding this place, not just driving through and making assumptions, really seeing it. Deal. Bethany stood and offered him her hand. Owen took it, feeling the warmth of her fingers against his, and when she pulled him to his feet, she didn't immediately let go. Meet me here tomorrow morning at 9, she said. And wear comfortable shoes. We're going exploring. Owen spent that night making calls, rearranging his schedule. His assistant was shocked when he said he needed to stay in Maplewood for at least another week, maybe 2. His board of directors would be furious. But for the first time in his career, Owen didn't care about their opinions more than he cared about getting this right. Bethany met him the next morning wearing jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt, her hair in a ponytail. She had a backpack slung over one shoulder and a thermos of coffee in hand. Ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. She led him through town, pointing out details he'd missed. The mural on the side of the hardware store that depicted the mill in its heyday, painted by a local artist. The memorial garden dedicated to workers who died in industrial accidents. The small museum in the Historical Society building, filled with photographs and artifacts from the mill's century of operation. They walked to the mill itself, climbing through a gap in the fence that Bethany clearly knew well. Inside, the building was massive and empty, sunlight streaming through broken windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. Old machinery stood silent and rusting, and graffiti covered some of the walls, but there was a grandeur to the space that Owen hadn't expected. This is where my great-grandfather worked, Bethany said, running her hand along a huge metal loom. He came from Mexico in the 1940s, barely spoke English. The mill gave him a job and he learned the language here, made friends, built a life. My grandmother was born here in Maplewood, went to school here, married here. My mother did the same. This mill made all of that possible. Owen looked around with new eyes, seeing not just a dilapidated building but a monument to working people, to immigrant dreams, to community building. What if we kept it? He said suddenly. What? What if we kept the building, restored it, and built the research facility inside? It would be more expensive, more complicated, but we could preserve the structure while giving it new purpose. Bethany's face lit up. Could you really do that? I don't know, but I'm going to try. They spent the next several days with Owen basically living in Maplewood, meeting with architects and engineers via video call, bringing in consultants to assess the building's structural integrity. The news spread through town quickly, and suddenly people were approaching him on the street, sharing their own mill stories, offering suggestions and support. Owen found himself having breakfast at the diner every morning, dinner at different family restaurants each night, always with Bethany by his side. She introduced him to everyone, and slowly, the wariness in people's eyes turned to cautious optimism. One evening, they sat in Bethany's small living room, surrounded by blueprints and sketches. Owen had been working with his architects to design a facility that would incorporate the mill's existing structure, preserving the iconic exterior and some of the original machinery while creating state-of-the-art research labs inside. This could actually work, Bethany said, studying a rendering. It's the mill, but transformed, the past and the future together. That's the idea. Owen rubbed his eyes, exhausted but energized in a way he hadn't been in years. The budget is significantly higher than my original plan, and the timeline is longer, but I think I can sell it to my board. What if they say no? Then I'll figure something else out. He looked at her. I'm not giving up on this, on the mill or on Maplewood. Both, Owen said quietly, and maybe on something else too. Bethany set down the papers she was holding. Owen, I know this is complicated. I know I live in New York and you're rooted here. I know we've only known each other for 2 weeks. But Bethany, I haven't felt this alive in years. Being here, working on this project, spending time with you, it matters in a way nothing else has in a long time. She moved closer to him on the couch. I feel it too. I've been trying not to because it seems impossible. You're a CEO with a whole life somewhere else. I'm a small-town librarian who never wants to leave Maplewood. How could this possibly work? I don't know, Owen admitted, but I want to try. Do you? Instead of answering, Bethany leaned in and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and full of possibility, and when they finally pulled apart, she was smiling. Yes, she said, I want to try. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Owen presented his revised proposal to his board via video conference, passionately arguing for the mill renovation despite the increased costs. The board was skeptical, but Owen's track record spoke for itself, and eventually they approved the project with conditions. He and Bethany spent every evening together, sometimes working on the project, sometimes just talking for hours about everything and nothing. She showed him her favorite spots in town, the creek where she used to catch tadpoles as a kid, the field where the town held its summer fair, the old oak tree where generations of teenagers had carved their initials. Owen found himself falling in love not just with Bethany but with Maplewood itself. The slower pace, the way people looked out for each other, the sense of belonging. He started to understand why she never wanted to leave, but the question of what came next loomed over them. Owen still had a company to run, responsibilities in New York that couldn't be ignored, and Bethany had made it clear that leaving Maplewood wasn't an option for her. The night before the second town council meeting, they lay on a blanket in Bethany's backyard, staring up at stars that Owen could never see in Manhattan. The light pollution there was too intense. But here, the sky was filled with pinpricks of light, the Milky Way stretching across the darkness. What happens after tomorrow? Bethany asked quietly. I present the new proposal. Hopefully the council approves it. Then we break ground and start construction. That's not what I mean. Owen turned on his side to look at her. I know, I've been thinking about it constantly. And I don't have easy answers, but I have ideas. He took her hand. The construction will take at least 18 months. I'll need to be here regularly to oversee things. I can work remotely a lot of the time, and once the facility is operational, I'll need to be here even more. You're talking about splitting your time between here and New York. For now. But Bethany, this project has made me realize something. I've been running Garrett Industries the way my father did, the way his father did before him. Hands-on, controlling every detail, living at the office. But that's not the only way to do it. I have good people working for me. I could delegate more, restructure things to give myself more flexibility. You do that. I'm already doing it. I've been here for almost a month and the company hasn't collapsed. Turns out I'm not as indispensable as I thought. He cupped her face with his free hand. I'm not saying I have it all figured out, but I'm saying I want to try, because you're worth it. This is worth it. Bethany's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want you to give up your life for me." "I'm not giving it up, I'm changing it. There's a difference." Owen kissed her gently. "Besides, maybe my life needed changing. Maybe I needed Maplewood as much as it needs the research facility." "Maybe you did," she whispered against his lips. The town council meeting the next night was packed even fuller than the first one. Owen's new presentation showcased the mill renovation in detail, explaining how they would preserve the building's historic character while creating a modern research facility inside. He talked about hiring local contractors for the construction, creating an internship program with the local community college, establishing a community fund that would support local projects. This time, when he finished, the room erupted in applause. Council members asked questions, but they were constructive ones about timelines and specifics. Mayor Green called for a vote, and it was unanimous. The project was approved. Bethany rushed to Owen as people crowded around to congratulate him and shake his hand. She threw her arms around his neck, and he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed. "You did it," she said when he set her down. "We did it," he corrected. Rosie appeared with a tray of champagne glasses she'd apparently brought from the diner. "This calls for a celebration." The party that followed was everything Owen's corporate celebrations weren't. It was loud and chaotic, with kids running around and multiple conversations happening at once. People kept coming up to thank him, to share their excitement, to welcome him to the community. And for the first time in his adult life, Owen felt like he truly belonged somewhere. Later that night, he and Bethany walked back to her house hand in hand. Inside, she made tea and they curled up on her couch together, exhausted but happy. "So what now?" Bethany asked. "Now I have to go back to New York for a few days to handle some things in person, but I'll be back next week to meet with the construction team. And then I keep coming back, as often as I can." Owen pulled her closer. "I meant what I said, Bethany. I'm changing my life. It won't happen overnight, but I'm restructuring the company to give me more flexibility. I'm promoting my VP to COO so he can handle more of the day-to-day operations. I'm going to split my time between New York and here. For how long? For as long as it takes. Maybe forever." He tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. "I'm falling in love with you. I might already be there. And I know it's fast and complicated, but I've spent my whole life being careful and calculated. For once, I want to take a risk on something that matters." Bethany's smile was radiant. "I love you too. I think I have since you showed up at the library looking completely out of place in your fancy suit." They kissed, and it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something real and lasting. Owen did go back to New York, but he was back in Maplewood within 5 days. He'd rented a small house on the edge of town, furnished it with help from Martha, who seemed to know every antique dealer and furniture maker in a 50-mile radius. It wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable, with a porch and a yard and enough space for a home office. Bethany helped him settle in, laughing at his attempts to use a manual can opener, and his confusion over why people waved at him when he drove past. But he was learning, adapting, becoming part of the fabric of the town. Construction on the mill began in November. Owen was there for the groundbreaking ceremony, along with what seemed like half the town. He gave a speech about honoring the past while building the future, and he saw people nodding, accepting him not as an outsider trying to change things, but as someone who understood what Maplewood was about. The months that followed fell into a pattern. Owen spent roughly half his time in Maplewood and half in New York. When he was away, he and Bethany talked every night, video calls where she showed him new books that had arrived at the library, and he told her about board meetings and strategy sessions. When he was in town, they were inseparable. He started attending town events, joining Bethany for movie nights at the library, helping with fundraisers and community projects. His relationship with his company changed too. His new COO proved more than capable, and Owen found himself able to step back from the constant grind. His board was initially resistant, but when they saw that the company continued to thrive, their objections faded. Owen was still CEO, still ultimately responsible, but he'd created space for a life outside the office. By spring, the mill renovation was progressing beautifully. The exterior had been restored to its former glory, the old brick cleaned and repointed, the massive windows repaired and replaced. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. They'd kept several of the old looms on display in the lobby area, creating a mini museum that told the building's history. The rest of the space was being converted into labs and offices, all while maintaining the industrial aesthetic that made the building special. Bethany came by often to watch the progress, and Owen loved showing her around, explaining how each space would be used. They'd started talking about the future more concretely. Owen was spending more time in Maplewood than in New York now, and it felt right. One evening in May, Owen asked Bethany to meet him at the mill after work. She arrived to find the construction crew had left for the day, but candles lit a path from the entrance to what would eventually be the main research floor. She followed them, her heart pounding. Owen stood in the center of the space, surrounded by candles, wearing jeans and the navy sweater he'd worn on their first date. The setting sun streamed through the tall windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "Owen, what is this?" "This is where it all started to change for me," he said. "This building, this town, everything that matters now began here." He took her hands. "I came to Maplewood thinking I'd spend 3 days here and never look back. Instead, I found the place I want to spend the rest of my life." "I found you." Bethany's breath caught as Owen dropped to one knee. "Bethany Torres, you've shown me what it means to be part of a community, to put down roots, to build something that matters beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. You've made me want to be a better man, to live a better life. Will you marry me?" The ring he pulled from his pocket was perfect, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, the deep blue of the evening sky. "Yes," Bethany breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." Owen slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her as the last rays of sunlight faded and the candles flickered around them. They were married that September, exactly a year after Owen had first driven into Maplewood. The ceremony was held in the town square, with seemingly the entire population in attendance. Bethany wore a simple white dress and flowers in her hair. Owen wore a suit, but had ditched the tie at Bethany's insistence. Mayor Green officiated, and Rosie insisted on catering the reception. Martha cried through the entire ceremony. Owen's mother, who'd flown in from Florida, kept whispering to anyone who'd listen about how happy she was that her son had finally found balance in his life. Owen's colleagues from New York looked bewildered by the casual, chaotic celebration, but Owen didn't care. This was his world now, these were his people, and he'd never been happier. The research facility opened the following spring. Owen hired locally as much as possible, bringing in specialists from outside only when necessary. The facility focused on developing medications for rare diseases, work that was meaningful but often overlooked by larger companies. It was profitable but not wildly so, and for the first time in his career, Owen was okay with that. Some things mattered more than maximum returns. Bethany continued as head librarian, though Owen loved teasing her that she was now married to her library's biggest donor. He'd quietly established an endowment that ensured the library's funding for decades to come. And while Bethany had been exasperated at first, she'd eventually accepted his argument that it was his money to do with as he pleased. They bought a house together, a craftsman bungalow with a big yard and room for the family they both wanted. Owen restructured his role at Garrett Industries again, moving fully into a chairman position and promoting his COO to CEO. He stayed involved in strategic decisions, but was no longer running the day-to-day operations. It was time, and he was ready. Their first child, a daughter they named Alina, was born 2 years after the wedding. Owen was in the delivery room, holding Bethany's hand and wondering how his heart could hold this much love. When the doctor placed Alina in his arms, her tiny face scrunched up and angry at being pulled from her warm cocoon, Owen felt tears running down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She really is," Bethany agreed, exhausted but glowing. Owen took paternity leave, something he never would have considered in his old life. He and Bethany spent those early weeks in a haze of diaper changes and midnight feedings and overwhelming love. The town rallied around them, bringing meals and offering advice and cooing over Alina whenever they went out. A son, Daniel, followed 2 years later. Their house filled with toys and laughter, with Alina's picture books scattered across every surface and Daniel's blocks in every corner. Bethany continued working part-time, and Owen arranged his schedule around her hours so one of them was always home with the kids. He'd occasionally travel to New York for board meetings, but he was always eager to return home. Manhattan held no appeal anymore. It was too loud, too fast, too impersonal. Maplewood was where he belonged. On their 5th anniversary, Owen and Bethany stood at the mill, now officially named the Torres Garrett Research Center at Bethany's insistence. The building was thriving, employing over 100 people, and making real advances in rare disease research. Inside the lobby, alongside the preserved looms and historical displays, hung a photograph from the mill's heyday. Workers posed together in front of the building. Bethany's great-grandfather was in that photo, young and serious, unaware of the life he was building for future generations. "You ever regret it?" Bethany asked, leaning against Owen's side. "Leaving your old life behind?" Owen thought about it seriously. He'd given up a lot. The prestige of being a hands-on CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, the penthouse apartment, the constant adrenaline rush of high-stakes deals. But he'd gained so much more. "Not for a second," he said. "This is the life I was supposed to have. I just didn't know it until I met you." "That's very romantic for a former ruthless businessman." Owen laughed. "I'm still ruthless, just more selective about what I'm ruthless about. Anyone threatens my family or this town, they'll find out exactly how ruthless I can be." Bethany turned to face him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I love you, Owen Garrett." "I love you too, Bethany Torres Garrett." They kissed in the shadow of the mill, the building that had brought them together and changed both their lives. Around them, Maplewood continued its gentle rhythm, people going about their days, looking out for each other, building community one small interaction at a time. Owen had come to this town expecting to spend 3 days and move on. Instead, he'd found everything he didn't know he was missing. Love, belonging, purpose beyond profit, and a place to call home. He'd learned that the best acquisitions couldn't be calculated on a spreadsheet, that the most valuable investments were in people and relationships, and that sometimes the biggest success came from being willing to change course completely. The research center's work continued to make breakthroughs. They developed treatments for several rare conditions, helping families who'd had no hope before. Owen made sure the medications were affordable, that profit wasn't the only consideration. It went against everything he'd learned in business school, but it felt right. Some things were more important than margins. Alina started school, and Owen found himself volunteering for field trips and school events, something that would have been unthinkable in his old life. He coached Daniel's little league team, despite knowing almost nothing about baseball when he started. He joined the town council, using his business experience to help Maplewood navigate challenges and opportunities. Bethany expanded the library's programs, creating maker spaces and technology classes, ensuring that Maplewood's kids had access to resources that might otherwise be out of reach for a small town. Owen funded most of it, but he'd learned to do it quietly, knowing Bethany didn't want people thinking the library was just Owen's pet project. It was the community's library and always would be. Years passed. Alina grew into a thoughtful girl who loved reading as much as her mother, often spending hours in the library after school. Daniel was more active, always running and climbing, but he inherited his father's analytical mind and loved taking things apart to see how they worked. Owen's parents, who'd initially been confused by his decision to leave New York, came to visit often. His mother fell in love with Maplewood and eventually bought a small condo in town, spending half the year there. His father remained skeptical of the small town life, but had to admit his son seemed happier than he'd ever been. The 10th anniversary of Owen's first visit to Maplewood was marked with a town celebration. The research center hosted an open house, showcasing their work and the building's transformation. The historical displays had expanded, with more photographs and artifacts donated by families who'd worked at the mill. It was a proper museum now, telling the story of the working people who'd built this community. At the celebration, Owen stood to speak, Bethany beside him, Alina and Daniel in the front row with Martha and Rosie. 10 years ago, I came to Maplewood as an outsider, he began. I saw this town as just another stop on a business trip, the mill as just another property to develop. I was wrong about everything. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Maplewood taught me what community means. It taught me that some things are more valuable than profit, that preserving the past matters, that people are more important than deals, and it gave me the greatest gift of my life. He looked at Bethany. This woman, who saw past my expensive suit and my corporate mindset to something worth saving, showed me what it means to truly be home. Bethany's eyes filled with tears, the way they always did when Owen got sentimental. So thank you, Maplewood. Thank you for making me want to stay forever. And thank you for showing me that the best investments aren't in buildings or businesses, but in people and the communities that sustain them. The applause was deafening. Alina jumped up and hugged her father's legs. Daniel waved at the crowd, enjoying the attention. And Bethany, his brilliant, kind, beautiful wife, stood on her toes to kiss Owen's cheek. Good speech, she whispered. I meant every word. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, Owen and Bethany sat on their porch swing, gently rocking in the darkness. Lightning bugs blinked in the yard, and somewhere down the street a dog barked. It was peaceful in a way Owen's old life never was. You remember that first day at the library? Bethany asked. You looked so out of place. I was out of place. I didn't belong here yet. But you do now. I do now, Owen agreed. This is where I belong. With you, with our kids, with this town. Everything that matters is right here. No regrets about the big city life. The excitement, the glamour. Owen pulled her closer. The only exciting thing about my old life was the constant stress. This is actually exciting. Watching our kids grow up, being part of a real community, working on research that helps people instead of just making shareholders rich. Going to sleep next to you every night and waking up next to you every morning. That's the dream, Bethany. That's everything. She rested her head on his shoulder. "I love our life. Me too. More than I ever thought possible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the gentle sounds of the night. Inside, their children slept safely. Around them, their neighbors did the same, all of them connected by invisible threads of community and care. Owen thought about the man he'd been when he first drove into Maplewood. Successful by every conventional measure but empty inside, chasing achievements that never quite satisfied, surrounded by people but deeply lonely. That man felt like a stranger now. The man he'd become was richer in every way that mattered. He had love, purpose, belonging. He had a partner who challenged him to be better and children who thought he hung the moon. He had a community that had welcomed him, and a town he'd do anything to protect. He'd come to Maplewood for business and stayed for love. But it wasn't just romantic love, though Bethany was the center of everything. It was love for this place, for the rhythm of small-town life, for the way people looked out for each other. It was love for work that mattered and relationships that ran deep. It was love for a life built on more than money and status. "What are you thinking about?" Bethany asked softly. "How lucky I am, how close I came to missing all of this." "But you didn't miss it. You're here." "I'm here," Owen agreed, "and I'm never leaving." They stayed on the porch until late, talking about their plans for the weekend, about Alina's upcoming school project, about Daniel's request for a puppy. Ordinary conversation about an ordinary life, and it was the most extraordinary thing Owen could imagine. Eventually, they went inside and climbed the stairs to their bedroom, checking on the kids on the way. Alina was sprawled across her bed, surrounded by books. Daniel was curled up with his favorite stuffed bear. Both of them were perfect and healthy and loved beyond measure. In their own room, Owen held Bethany close as they drifted off to sleep. Through the open window, he could hear the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Peaceful sounds of a peaceful place. His last thought before sleep claimed him was gratitude. For the librarian who'd made him want to stay. For the town that had welcomed him. For the life he'd found when he stopped chasing success and started seeking meaning. He'd been a CEO who thought he had everything figured out. It turned out he'd known nothing about what really mattered. Maplewood had taught him. Bethany had shown him. And now, finally, he was home. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The research center grew, adding a second building when the first could no longer accommodate their expanding team. Owen and Bethany's children thrived, becoming teenagers with their own dreams and ambitions. Alina talked about becoming a teacher, inspired by her mother's dedication to education. Daniel had inherited his father's business mind and was already talking about entrepreneurship. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Owen and Bethany threw a party in the town square, the same place they'd been married. Martha was there, older now but still sharp and warm. Rosie had retired but came anyway, bringing her famous pie. The research center staff mingled with library volunteers, with teachers and shopkeepers and farmers. The whole town showed up, because that's what Maplewood did. Mayor Green, who'd presided over their wedding, stood to make a toast. 20 years ago, a man in an expensive suit drove into our town planning to tear down our mill and put up some generic building. We were ready to run him out on a rail. Laughter echoed through the crowd. But Bethany saw something in him we couldn't see yet. And Owen, to his credit, he listened. He learned. He changed. And in doing so, he helped change all of us. He showed us that we could honor our past while building our future. The Owen Garrett Research Center isn't just a workplace. It's a symbol of what's possible when we're willing to work together, to compromise, to find solutions that serve everyone. Owen felt Bethany squeeze his hand. So here's to Owen and Bethany, the mayor continued. To 20 years of marriage, to partnership, to love that transformed not just two people but an entire community. May you have at least 20 more. At least, Owen called out, making everyone laugh again. The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and children running around in the darkness, catching fireflies just like Bethany had done as a child, just like their own children had done, just like future generations would do. As the evening wound down, Owen and Bethany found themselves alone for a moment, standing at the edge of the square, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate. 20 years, Bethany mused. It feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. Best 20 years of my life, Owen said. And it only gets better. Even when Daniel crashes your car when he gets his license next year, Owen groaned. Don't remind me, I'm not ready for him to drive. None of us are ready for our kids to grow up, but they do anyway. Bethany leaned against him. I'm grateful we get to watch them do it together. Me too. I'm grateful for all of it, every single day. They stood there as the party broke up around them, as people called goodbyes and headed home to their own houses and their own lives. The same streets Owen had driven down 20 years ago, thinking he'd be here for 3 days and never return. The same buildings, though some had new coats of paint and new owners. The same essence of community that had captivated him from the start. He traveled around the world in his business career, stayed in 5-star hotels, eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants, closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. None of it compared to this. To standing in a small town square with his wife, watching their community celebrate with them, knowing he was exactly where he belonged. The librarian who'd brought him coffee that first day at the library. The woman who challenged him to do better, be better. His partner, his love, his home. She'd made him want to stay forever, and forever hadn't been long enough. I love you, he whispered. I love you too, Bethany replied. Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me a reason to. They walked home hand in hand through the quiet streets, their children running ahead of them, laughing about something only teenagers found funny. Their house glowed warmly in the darkness, a beacon calling them home. Inside, later, after the kids had gone to bed and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Owen and Bethany sat together on their couch, reviewing photographs from the evening on Bethany's phone. 20 years of memories, thousands of photographs, a life documented in images and moments. No regrets, Bethany asked, the same question she'd asked before, because sometimes you needed reassurance even after 20 years. Not a single one, Owen answered, the same answer he always gave because it was true. This life we've built, this family, this place. It's everything I never knew I wanted and couldn't live without now. Good answer, Bethany said, kissing him softly. Very good answer. They went upstairs eventually, checked on Alina and Daniel one more time and settled into their own bed. Through the window, Owen could see the stars, the same stars that had shone down on him that first night in Maplewood when he'd thought he was just killing time before a business meeting. He'd been so wrong about everything, and thank God for that. Thank God for wrong turns that led to right places. Thank God for small towns and librarians who challenged you. Thank God for communities that welcomed strangers. Thank God for love that changed everything. Owen Garrett, former CEO who'd thought success was measured in profits and market share, had learned the truth in Maplewood. Success was measured in relationships, in the depth of connection, in the quality of your days and the love in your life, in coming home to people who mattered and work that meant something and a place that felt like yours. He'd come for business. He'd stayed for love. And he'd never, for a single moment, looked back. Bethany's breathing evened out beside him as she fell asleep. Owen lay awake a little longer, grateful in the way he'd learned to be grateful in this town, not taking things for granted, appreciating the ordinary, extraordinary moments. Understanding that all of this, was the real treasure. Outside, Maplewood slept. The mill-turned research center stood dark against the night sky, a monument to transformation and second chances. The library where Owen had first really seen Bethany waited for morning, and another day of serving the community. The houses and shops and streets that made up this small town rested, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. And in a craftsman bungalow on Maple Street, Owen Garrett closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, surrounded by love and home and everything that mattered. The CEO who'd learned that the best acquisition of his life had been the heart of a small-town librarian, and the life they'd built together in the place where he'd finally learned what home really meant.